Welcome back. It was 87 years ago that the world's first sour gas well was drilled at Hell's Half Acre in Turner Valley, Alberta. It was reported at the time that fumes from flaring and venting peeled paint from houses and dissolved lead fillings. In the years since then, exposure to sour gas from drilling operations has been blamed for a long list of environmental and health problems. There are now more than 6,000 sour gas wells in the province, with many more approved for drilling in the future. And that has many Albertans who exist side by side with big oil and gas saying enough is enough. Here is Victor Meller with a report of the fight over a vast natural resource that is fueling Alberta's economy, but is also fueling fears.
Get up there.
A cattle drive in Big Sky country. Alberta's Pekisko Valley on the eastern slopes of the Rockies is about as wild as the West gets, where the rancher is king and cowboys still ride the range. And you'll find few as passionate about this way of life as Gordon and Wendy Cartwright.
This is God's canvas. It's as close to truth and beauty as you'll find on the planet.
Postcard perfect and an important sanctuary for wildlife. The deer and moose are just some of the animals that live here in abundance. And then there's the water. Ecologists have a term for it.
It's called nature services, and they're priceless. All the engineers in the world can't replicate the grace and functionality of an intact watershed.
An expansive, beautiful landscape that's in peril because it's here that oil giant Petro-Canada wants to tap into underground gas reserves. They dig it up and bury 51 kilometers of pipeline across the eastern slopes of the Rockies. And there's not much anyone can do to stop them. Petro-Canada spokesperson Kyle Happy.
This is an area that's been zoned for oil and gas development. It's a multi-use zone.
They'll drill 11 wells that'll go to a sour gas processing plant like this one. The gas is called sour because it smells like rotten eggs. Scientists call it hydrogen sulfide, or H2S. Gordon Cartwright thinks big oil's footprint in the Pekisko Valley will be the beginning of the end.
It'll lead to the unwinding of the ranching community that holds this landscape together in terms of the ecological process.
But drilling for sour gas can do more than ruin this pretty view. When H2S is released into the atmosphere, it's toxic and can be fatal. Even in small quantities, sour gas can cause brain damage and a host of other serious health problems. If there's anybody who knows about the dangers of sour gas, it's the Graff family. 10 years ago, they owned a prosperous farm near the town of Vulcan in southern Alberta. Then in 1998, this sour gas well blew, leaking toxic chemicals downwind onto their farm and onto Darrell.
I heard this roar, and I looked around, and I saw a big flare over at the well. About a minute later, I was starting to get short of breath, and I was like, just couldn't get a breath. And so I thought, this is strange. And so I thought, I better go back towards the house.
And then he came into the house, and I was at the door, opened the door, and he just came in and laid down on the floor.
Darrell's life changed forever. Before the blast, Darrell was an athletic 21-year-old with a bright future in farming. After the leak, he developed pneumonia. That was just the beginning of a long list of health problems he claims were caused by sour gas.
I've had brain damage, and that's caused heart problems. I've had seizures. I've had gastrointestinal problems. What else have I had? Liver problems, kidney problems.
But Petro-Canada insists the fears of development in Pekisko Valley are overblown.
Albertans may be against development, but are they familiar with what Petro-Canada has proposed and what they're looking at doing to develop this resource in a safe and responsible manner?
That's bullshit.
Canadian music legend Ian Tyson is a local cowboy and owns this High River coffee shop.
You can't have it both ways. You can't drill pipeline ditches and put in the infrastructure for pipe, because that means roads. As soon as you do that and build a pipe, the wilderness isn't there anymore, you know? I mean, it's one way or the other. You can't have a little bit of wilderness and a lot of oil and gas development.
He's not the only one who wants to keep industry out. A recent poll shows 74% of Albertans are against developing Pekisko Valley.
Obviously, they have concerns about it, but we feel that we can do this. There can be balanced development.
How are you going to get along with the ranchers when you know they don't want you there?
Ultimately, the decision is going to lie in the hands of the ERCB.
That's the Energy Resources Conservation Board in Calgary. They're the Alberta government regulator who approve new oil and gas projects and keep people safe at the same time. Spokesperson Bob Curran.
Companies are simply not allowed to go into areas and destroy streams, animal habitat. Those things are considered. And if they can't protect those areas, if they can't develop in a way that ensures that that damage won't occur, they won't get approval to drill those wells.
Andrew Nikiforuk is a Calgary-based author and journalist who has written about the oil industry for 20 years. He says the ERCB does a poor job of protecting the public interest. The reason, he thinks, is clear.
The board is 58% funded by industry. So a regulator that it is funded by the very people that it's supposed to regulate is by definition a compromised agency.
Many people think that makes the ERCB one-sided. Linda Thurston, for instance, who lives in the Big Valley area. Her ranch is within breathing distance of a dozen gas wells.
We smelt serious gas leaks probably 20 times a year.
Since 2004, one gas well alone had 5 serious sour gas leaks.
I encountered a pocket of sour gas in the early evening that was so strong that I almost passed out and fell off my horse.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and give a warm welcome to the Thurston Gang.
The Thurstons are a celebrity rodeo family. They claim the last sour gas leak affected the entire family and all their prized rodeo horses.
We were immediately sickened. It took an hour and 45 minutes for the company to respond to us, to come to the house. We had to call them back and say, look, we're getting sick here. The dogs vomited on the floor. The kids' lips were going numb. Our faces were tingling. We were really sick and frightened.
According to Linda, the company continued to ignore her complaints, so she went to the ERCB for help, but instead encountered more frustration.
One of the things that upset us the most was that the ERCB sat in on this mediating session, but wouldn't bring up all the past offenses that the company had had in our area.
If they know something is happening at a plant, don't they have the responsibility to tell people who live in the area that you have gas leaks, sour gas leaks?
They have a huge responsibility, but they also have a mandate from the government to make sure that oil and gas production goes ahead in this province.
We've spoken to a lot of ranchers, a lot of farmers, who say they truly believe that the ERCB takes the side of the oil and gas companies, that they lose out time and time again in their disputes. You buy that?
You know, we hear that at times from landowners, but what people don't often hear are the concerns that we hear from the industry. And they frequently say, we have too many regulations, there are too many consultation requirements, we're too green, we're too public friendly.
The Graff family didn't find the ERCB very friendly.
I have asked them for their personal attention to our problems. I've said, will you help us?
And they say?
They ignore my letters. On one occasion, one of them had one of the lawyers write and say, we will sometime make a decision on your reviews. We are still waiting for those decisions to be made.
All they want is the ERCB to stop approving new wells near their home. It's just too dangerous to Daryl's health. But that hasn't happened, and gas leaks continue. Each time, Daryl's reaction is more severe.
I can die. if it's a bad enough exposure or if it reacts with me in the particular way. I can get seizures. I fall to the ground, my legs don't work. Other times I can freeze up until I'm just like a block of ice.
Darryl survived yet another gas leak, but his parents weren't taking any more chances. They sold the farm and moved 20 kilometers away to an area free of industrial wells. But now there's a new threat. The ERCB has approved 4 new gas wells, and Darryl has had to endure several more gas leaks.
The graphs are just another sad case of how the board is prepared to sacrifice rural people in order to approve sour gas wells, and the board has consistently failed to uphold their rights.
The Graffs now live in this trailer without proper plumbing. Fearful of the next gas leak, they always have their bags packed, ready to flee.
I have 7 grandchildren who I am scared to have come visit me because I don't want the same thing to happen to them.
At 30, Darryl Graff is aged beyond his years and can barely tend his cows. His mother's emotions fluctuate between anguish for her son and rage against the regulating board.
When you see a guy that was a contributor to society struck down with this stuff, and the very people that I always thought were there to help us only condones what's going on and actually encourages what is going on.
Next,
there's something wrong with our cattle. They were all messed up.
communities cope with some strange events.
Sometimes couldn't even close the tap because so much gas was coming out.
And families keep up the fight for someone to take the blame.
Why was he born with these birth defects?
When CTV's W5 continues. In just a moment, what's being done to keep citizens safe from oil and gas development? We'll be right back.
Drayton Valley, northwest of Calgary, is a hub for gas and oil development. It's also the location of the worst sour gas disaster in Alberta history. In 1982, this well blew near the town of Lodgepole, killing 2 workers. It burned out of control for 67 days, spewing 280,000 tons of sour gas into the atmosphere. The stench was detectable 1,500 kilometers away in Winnipeg. Farmer Lawrence Strocher witnessed the disaster from his farm 40 kilometers away.
In '82, our farm was just really getting going, and we knew nothing about H2S and these sour wells that are in our backyards right now. At the time of the blowout, we just listened to what we were told. And that was, oh, everything's fine, don't worry about anything.
But then he found that even from a distance, everything wasn't okay. First, the cattle started acting strangely.
They just coughed and choked, and their eyes were running, and they went off a feed. So we got vets out, and we said, there's something wrong with our cattle. And all they could find is that the enzymes in the blood were all out of whack. They were all messed up.
The newborns were messed up too.
The calves were weak. I mean, they would stumble around. They didn't know how to suck. It was, nature wasn't...
Nature was out of whack.
Nature was totally out of whack.
About 9 months after Lodgepole, the Strocher's son was born with severe birth defects.
We're perfectly normal people. We lived healthy lives. We've never had problems. And why was he born with these birth defects?
Lawrence blames the Lodgepole blowout for his son's bad health.
We can only assume that. And the more time that passes, the more I am so convinced that that's exactly what it was.
Lawrence Strocher lobbied industry for a gas monitor, and now he can check for sour gas on his computer. If there's a leak, an alarm will sound. A great idea. But he worries about the kids at the local primary school. It's in a valley about 3 kilometers downwind from a newly approved sour gas well. If it ever blew, he doesn't think the kids would get out fast enough.
You're not going to beat that stuff, and somebody's going to get hurt.
Even the fire chief thinks it's crazy. Jim Phelan advised the ERCB not to approve a gas well that close to a school.
If our Tomahawk Fire Department was effectively removed from responding, I would have to bring resources in from far away, which in fact would be much too late for us to be able to effect a viable rescue situation.
The board is so dysfunctional that it has completely ignored the sentiments of all of the local residents, and has said, you guys be damned, we're going to put these wells in.
Wells like this one, approved despite the company's dismal record.
This company has committed 13 high-risk examples of what the board calls non-compliance, including not telling the board about sour gas leaks and all kinds of faulty equipment, and you name it. 13 times.
If sour gas wasn't bad enough, there's a new form of gas to worry about. Buried beneath the hills of Wheatland County are huge coal deposits. Gas companies now have the technology to extract methane gas from coal seams. The problem is, drilling can seriously affect the groundwater. In the hamlet of Rosebud, resident Jessica Ernst thinks that's why her well water is contaminated with methane gas.
My water well turned really more into a gas well. And I sometimes couldn't even close the kitchen sink tap or the bathtub tap because so much gas was coming out. You could feel it blowing out the tap, even when you had the tap tried to force it closed.
Ernst understands how the oil and gas industry works. She's an environmental biologist who's worked for decades as a consultant in the oil patch. She wanted to show W5 just how contaminated and undrinkable her water is.
So we decided to fill some bottles. This is how we tested for whether there'd be any flammable gas in the water.
So how much gas is in her well water? Watch this.
Oh! It still is shocking.
I know, it scares me every time. And I lived with this, and the government says I should continue living with this. They delivered us safe water for a few years, and then in spring of 2006, they ceased the water deliveries and said, hook it up, you just have to vent, which it is here already, and the water's safe because it meets all Canadian drinking water guidelines.
The government received so many complaints about the gassy water in Rosebud, they had several wells tested by the Alberta Research Council. Their conclusion? Industry isn't to blame.
How do you deal
ERCB spokesperson Bob Curran.
It's naturally occurring methane, and when you complete a water well in a coal seam, that's the productive pattern. You get very clean water with not much gas, and as the water gets drawn down, you tend to get more gas.
But author Andrew Nikiforuk says that's only part of the picture given in the report.
It stated very clearly that Alberta did not have a fair, consistent, or reliable protocol for investigating groundwater contamination. And it's also been contested by other scientists who say, look, we have very clear-cut evidence of industrial contamination of water wells in this province.
When Ernst asked the government for data on her own well water, she was told to file a Freedom of Information request.
They test your well, they don't give you the information?
I just received a letter in writing from them telling me that Alberta Environment threw the data away.
When Ernst continually questioned the ERCB, she claims they wrongly accused her of threatening to blow up gas wells.
I received a letter from the ERCB. I call it a banishment letter. They stated in the letter that they had ordered their staff to have nothing further to do with me, and they copied the RCMP.
She must have done something pretty threatening to report her to the RCMP.
There was a point when our staff felt threatened, and so we took measures at that point.
Did the RCMP ever knock on your door and say, hey, the ERCB are saying that you made threats?
No, they never did. I did have a meeting with a lawyer from the ERCB. I have to admit that those 2.5 hours were the most terrifying of my life. He was trying to get the evidence to back up their banishment 6 months prior. He even went so far as to try to get me to admit that I have bombs in the barn.
Well, hardly. She doesn't even own a pellet gun. Ernst refuses to back down and plans to sue the ERCB.
It's supposed to be fair and responsible development, but I really think that their direction from the government is rubber stamp those approvals. Don't let anything get in industry's way.
And here, on the last frontier, the ranchers of Pekisko Valley wait to find out who will win, nature or big oil and gas. Gordon and Wendy Cartwright are ready to stand up to preserve their beloved valley.
It's like taking a rowboat out against the Armada.
But we're standing up for something that's right. Anybody who's against saving these eastern slopes is against grandchildren. So it's our time in history to stand up.
This should be the very last place that we develop those resources.
W5 will return in a moment. Welcome back to W5. Here's what you'll see on our next edition.
Somebody must be missing them somewhere.
The hunt for a serial killer
Both victims had their hands tied behind their backs.
takes an unexpected turn.
I was completely shocked.
How a cold case from